Hello, it's Anthony Chadwick from the Webinar Vet, welcoming you to another episode of VETchat, the number one UK veterinary podcast. And I'm thrilled today to have Sergio Silvetti, who's come on the webinar today. Sergio has gained fame through a famous tortoise that we're going to be talking about in a little bit, but also Sergio works at Rutland House in St Helens, a practice that I worked in the mid-90s, and just wanted to have a call out for John Tandy, who sadly passed away recently, and of course founded Rutland House. It was one of the first veterinary hospitals in the country. So let's have this podcast in memory and in honor of John Tandy, who did so much for the profession. So, Sergio, thank you so much for coming on. And tell us a little bit about your background as a vet, and then we'll move on to some other issues and topics.
Okay, hi everybody. It's a pleasure for me to be here, and thank you for inviting me. A little bit of background from me. I graduated in 1999 from Milan. I wandered around part of North Italy for 10 years, and then I decided to move here in the UK. And since I moved here, I mostly, if not only, worked in first opinion and referral exotic practices. And I gained my certificate in advanced veterinary practice in ZooMed in 2016. And since then, I always enjoyed, and I still enjoying working with all the weird creatures, big and small, that can pass through my console room. This is a bit boring, but this is it.
Oh, no, it's not boring at all, Sergio. And I think, exotic medicine is a real challenge. It requires sometimes for people to think outside the box, but actually also inside the box, because when it's all said and done, the approach to a dog with pneumonia, isn't that different to a rabbit with pneumonia or a reptile with respiratory issues, is it?
It is exactly this. Is exactly that. Is applying basic skills learned at the uni to different animals, different species. Of course, you have to get a little bit of anatomic differences, anatomic knowledge. But at the end, when I approach my patients, no matter what they are, from a rabbit to a giant African snail, is always the same. I start from the head, I end up to the tail, at the tail when they have it. But my reasoning skills and my reasoning approach is exactly the same as if it was a dog or a cat. So that is what I always stress to students that come over to learn, and the referring vet would refer cases to us.
And you can learn so much from a history as well. I often found with my dermatology consults that the advantage I had was I could spend a lot of time with the client as opposed to perhaps a first opinion vet could. And sometimes just those questions would actually tease out so much information that you felt by the end of the
True.
history that you almost had a diagnosis before you even started the physical exam, didn't you?
True, yeah, and above all in reptiles, where most of the conditions are husbandry related.
Yeah.
I spent most of the initial consultation chatting with the owners and trying to get as many information as possible before even touching my patient. So it is true. And spending a little bit more of time investigating like a CSI detective most of the times helps. Yeah.
And I think you made a really good point about the husbandry. If you get the husbandry right with rabbits, with guinea pigs, with reptiles, with birds, then the likelihood is that there's going to be a lot more health. So it's really preventative medicine, in the same way that
Hmm.
we vaccinate a dog against distemper. in
Yeah.
reptiles and some other exotics, getting that husbandry right will prevent a lot of problems. So education is so important with keeping exotic pets because often the client isn't really aware of the needs of that particular species, are they?
The major problem are the information that you find around,
Yes.
because I still get the latest one yesterday, still get people coming over after being asked on a Facebook forum, definite specialistic forums, then the pet shop, and then they arrived to us. And the amount of wrong information that you can still get online, it is incredible. I still cannot believe that at the moment, the most common misunderstanding in husbandry is feeding rabbits with wrong food
Yeah.
recommended by specialistic pet shops. Is still unbelievable how much misinformation and misunderstanding is around about the basic and easy management of these pets. Is incredible, and that what frustrates me a lot, because if you fix that, probably we won't work that much, but the health of the pets will increase significantly.
Yeah, it's a really good point, Sergio. And we've been very fortunate to do quite a lot of work with John Chitty and Burgess Pet Foods, and obviously, some of the information that we've heard from there is well worth listening to. So, for those people listening, as vets and nurses who want to learn a bit more, I would advise go onto the website and look at some of the information about nutrition for rabbits, guinea pigs, dagoos, all sorts of the small fairies as we often call them.
Yeah.
Um, I suppose, in a sense, Eddie is a really interesting story, and perhaps if you tell us a little bit about the story. But we've got this super famous tortoise that lives in St Helens or wherever, and he's become a bit of a media phenomenon, hasn't he?
It has, yes. I mean, a little bit of history of Eddie. Eddie was brought to me after being what I strongly suspect being beaten and chewed, literally chewed to the bones by rats. And so the first approach on the front legs, sorry,
Yes.
the first approach was to try to save those legs. So we tried with local treatment and systemic antibiotics, of course, analgesia, and so on and so on. But unfortunately, after a few weeks, the damage was too extensive, and there was a necrosis of the forearms from the elbow joint to the toes. So the peculiarity of this case is that both of the front legs have been severely damaged, and we had to take the decision that it was either to humanely euthanize or amputate those necrotic limbs and apply some sort of support of the on the shell
Hmm.
that I decided to use a monster truck wheels to allow him to continue to live outside in the garden without any major problems. And so we did. The surgery went absolutely fine. Eddie recovered incredibly quickly, and literally he started wheeling away an hour after the recovery, and he started eating as well straight away after the anesthetic. So everything looked absolutely fine, and he's still looking fine. Now I should see him for the final post-operative check. I guess if not this week, or probably the next one.
Hmm.
But up to now, everything looks fine. He's happy. He's eating, and he's doing incredibly well. He's mobile. He's able to run around the garden, run around his house, and he's doing very well. I'm really happy with him.
And I think we were talking before about the fact that, obviously a lot of people in the summertime keep their tortoises out during the day, but obviously bring them in of an evening. But he disappeared and he ended up staying out on what was a cold and wet night. And in those sort of situations, because they're cold-blooded animals, they actually go in almost into a bit of a sense of torpor, don't they?
Yes, being ectothermic, their metabolism is related to the external temperature, and when it drops too much, for example, that I don't remember specifically what night it was, but I remember that it was a quite a cold and rainy night. They simply are unable to move because the metabolism is too low,
Hmm.
and rats and or rodents or wild animals take advantage. I say I blame in inverted commas rats because those aggressions, those traumas are or were very common in Italy, where I worked for many years during the hibernation period.
Hmm.
So is an assumption. I cannot blame them 100%, but is a, let's call it, informed assumption. So when they are too cold, when they are below a certain temperature, they simply cannot react, and rodents and rats take advantage.
And this was over quite a short period because I think he was found the next morning
Next morning, yeah.
already with the injuries. But you made a really important point, for vets and perhaps if clients are listening as well, if pet owners are listening. We often put our tortoises in sheds when they're hibernating for the winter in a box. But as we all know, rodents, mice, and rats will nibble very easily through cardboard, won't they? And then get in and obviously start attacking the actual tortoise that's in hibernation
Yeah.
inside.
Yeah, correct. The Unfortunately, that is the, in inverted commas, the traditional way to hibernate tortoises, but unfortunately, it's not the best, because what you just mentioned, but above all, because nowadays the winters are not that cold anymore. So here in the UK, the temperature drops to a limit where it will stop. It will slow down the metabolism of reptiles, but not enough for a full hibernation.
Yeah.
And that can cause what is called a post hibernation anorexia when and if they wake up. So the recommended ways to hibernate chelonians is not the shed anymore, but is the fridge. Okay, that is much safer. You can control the pet much easier, and it is more controlled. And technically, it will reproduce what happens in the wild, where the temperature drops on a specific limit, a specific level. Sorry, to allow them to get a proper and natural hibernation and then recover easily and nicely when it's time to wake up.
And I suppose in southern Europe, where tortoises live, do they often dig and bury themselves
Yeah,
in the hibernation? So they're underneath the soil, then, aren't they, in natural situations?
yeah, correct. And that is when they find their sweet spot of temperature and conditions. Here in the UK, I found two main problems. One is the temperature, and second, and less evident, let's put it in this way, is the humidity. Here, the humidity level is so high that even if they bury them in a garden, there is a high risk of fungal or bacterial infection because the softening of the keratin layer of the shell. So it's not recommended to just leave them by themselves and doing whatever their instinct tells to do.
No, it's interesting. But I mean, going back to Eddie, you obviously put the you put the wheels on. Was that front and back or just on the front?
Just on the front.
Just on the
I
front.
needed something to balance the body, because otherwise the shell would be will graze on the floor. It will struggle to move, because the
Yes.
grip of the shell on the floor, it would be not possible for a normal life. I have to say that I applied wheels, and I'm not the only one who does that on previous tortoises, but most of the times it was just one leg for traumas,
Yeah.
etc., infection, and so on. So once we amputate one leg, we apply either a wheel or a smooth thing, okay, to allow them to slide, but also to
Yeah.
balance the body as leveled as possible.
I think there is an advert for one of the infamous or famous, however you want to call it, train companies where the tortoise is careering down the slopes with its four wheels on, and of course, it was probably a rather stupid question. So I apologise, Sergio, because with four wheels there wouldn't be much of a break for the poor old tortoise if it
No,
did on a hill, would it?
well, four wheels, I assume that is not able to move. So
But Eddie, as we said, appeared on BBC News Granada reports, and
yeah,
even possibly we think went international as well, didn't he?
the owner told me that she's been contacted by Fox News in US. Yes,
That I think is the now the power of the internet and things, because it's not just
yeah,
television; it goes on the internet, it goes onto YouTube, goes onto
exactly.
social media, and it very quickly becomes global. A bit like Webinar Vet. Once we digitalized our education, took it just away from being physical to making it online. We've been able to have people from all over the world listen to
Yeah,
our education, which is great, because obviously the standard is high in the UK, and it's great that people where perhaps the standard isn't so high can actually also learn and things, and democratize learning as well.
right. Yeah, that is a nice, interesting terminology.
Yeah, brilliant.
Democratize.
So how do you when you're looking at exotics, have you got a particular favorite species or group of exotics that you particularly like, or do you find that you like it's always a difficult question. People say, do you prefer dogs to cats?
Yeah.
Always a difficult question. I tend to avoid it, but I'm asking you anyway.
Okay. I mean, I have to say that yes, you're not the first one who asks me these type of question. I normally put reptiles and reptiles as first. Avian recently, I'm getting more and more interested, but the bulk of our work is made on small mammals, mostly rabbits.
Yeah,
Plus, I enjoyed, and I still enjoy, if I could, work with zoo animals. They are always fascinating. There are species that are not you are not you don't see every day and you don't hear every day. And the weirdest one I worked with was a marabou, and that was the ugliest bird ever, but at the same time beautiful. Okay,
yeah.
so that was the fascinating thing on working with zoo. No matter what you had to adapt to all the different species in the world.
I suppose a final question, that we're doing this recording in early September, and we'll start moving into those other creatures, those wild creatures that hibernate, like hedgehogs. Is that something you see a lot of at Rutland? Have people bringing in hedgehogs?
Well, wild hedgehogs, yes. Unfortunately, yes. Everyone around here sees a hedgehog that on his own and just take it and bring it to us, even if sometimes it's not really needed.
Yeah,
Otherwise, wild animals are not my main interest. Let's put it in this way.
yeah.
We see African hedgehogs, so yes, we see hedgehogs, but wild ones, unfortunately, most of the times are We see them because people think that they are sick, but they actually are not. So
Yeah, and I think you make a really good point. It's the same with wild birds. Sometimes
yeah,
people are bringing them in, and of course, it takes them away from their natural environment where maybe family is, and
exactly.
then taking them somewhere else. And actually, that can be really difficult. So it's always best if you do bring in a hedgehog and it stays in the vets for a day or two, that it does go back to its place where
Where
it
it
was
is, yeah.
found.
We
Yeah.
tend to do that, yes. We still tend to do that.
And any sort of plans for the future with where do you see perhaps exotic medicine going? Do you think it's a an area that is going to become more popular? And what's the big challenges, around education? How can we get better at educating clients so they look after their exotic pets better?
Okay, let's start from the last one. Educating clients, it will be, in my opinion, would be extremely useful to arrange meetings with people, explaining them what they are getting into. I don't know, make a evening in basic reptiles husbandry or basic avian husbandry or even basic rabbit husbandry and
Mm,
nutrition and so on and so on. The problem is that the people who will follow those things are people who has already the animals. Those things should be before. These things should be known before getting a pet. Regarding what where I see exotic and what I've seen from my beginning to now, the the growth was, and I think that is still quite exponential. Okay, the main problem is probably now as a bit of a pessimistic way views, but we are getting loads of vets that are interested in exotics and or they can get postgraduate certificate and so on and so on. So the risk is that there will be too many exotic vets, reducing the actual amount of exotic cases. Let's put it in this
yeah,
way, because instead of concentrating those cases in few places, they will be scattered all over the country. So from one point of view, is a good thing because more people will get more interested, more knowledgeable, more people, more chat, more knowledge. But at the same time, there is a risk. I don't know how far fetched is this view, but there is a risk of parcellating or reducing the amount of cases and actual work, and is what I've
mm.
seen in Italy before moving here.
You then have less experience because you're seeing fewer cases in that particular
Exactly.
area. Yeah. And I think also sometimes people, have children who want a pet and they actually say, well, we'll get you a lizard or we'll get you a rabbit. And in a lot of ways, the husbandry of that creature is much more challenging than, for example, having a cat, isn't it?
Yes and no. The challenge is just, in my opinion, is just the beginning. Okay,
Yeah.
because once you, if I have to recommend a reptile's pet, I would recommend a snake.
Yeah.
Easy, very good looking. There are snakes that are amazing. Most of them are really tame.
Yes.
The main problem is setting up the right tank. But once the tank is up and running, literally more or less every reptile is easy to keep.
Yeah.
The main problem is setting up, investing a little bit of time and a little bit of money, because you have to invest in lights and tank and
Heaters and so
substrate and heat and so on and so on. And that is probably what put off a little bit the people at the beginning.
on. Mm.
And still, the information that people, even if they are really willing but completely unaware of the type of animals they get. They get information from people who claims to be expert, but the expertise of those people probably, if it is any, is way outdated. Nowadays, newer informations are coming out every month technically, but the information I see and I get from clients who had bought a new pet lizard, and they come and say, "Oh, I heard they told me to do such and such," is completely wrong, and
Yeah.
I don't understand why. And that is where the education pre purchase would make the difference.
Hmm. And almost education through the vet, because the vet is probably hopefully going to know more
Hopefully, yeah.
than an enthusiast. Yeah. Sergio, that's really great. It's really interesting to get some of your insights. Great to hear about Eddie. I'm so pleased that he's doing better as well. And yeah, looking forward, hopefully, seeing you at some point in the northwest. We're both quite close, so it'd be great to see you at some point.
Come along. I will. We will get a beer on my local pub here.
That sounds
More than
great.
welcome.
Sergio, take care. Thanks again, and thanks everyone for listening. Bye
Thank
bye.
you very much. Bye.